This time of year, a good hoodie is absolutely essential. But these days, it's tough to find one that will last through the season. That's why the American Giant Classic Full Zip Hoodie is made to last a lifetime, so you can count on it to bring you comfort and warmth year after year. Slate Magazine called it the greatest hoodie ever made, and from cotton to zipper, it's made right here in the USA. It's crafted with timeless style, heavyweight fleece, a double-lined hood, and reinforced elbow patches, which means this hoodie can withstand any outing or adventure. It'll be your new favorite hoodie, and you can depend on it for years to come. Plus, buying from American Giant means supporting local communities of farmers, manufacturers, and more. This season, snag the hoodie that will bring you comfort for life, the American Giant Classic Full Zip, and save 20% off your first order at american-giant.com when you use code CLASSIC24 at checkout. That's 20% off your first order at american-giant.com, code CLASSIC24.
My name is Ngoc Minh Ngo, and I am a photographer and author.
Hello, you're listening to Art, where we get up close and personal with women from around the world of visual arts. I'm Chris Stafford, and this is Season 2, Episode 24. My guest this week is the Vietnamese photographer and author Ngoc Minh Ngo. Ngoc was born in Vietnam in 1963 and grew up during the Vietnam War. Her father, Chow Minh Ngo, was a colonel in the South Vietnam Army, and her mother, Phay Trong, became a nurse's aide after raising 8 children. Ngoc was the 6th child. She had 4 sisters and 3 brothers. And despite enduring a brutal war, Ngoc describes her childhood as enchanting and beautiful. Her parents did all they could to protect their family and offer some normalcy to those troubling times by spending time on the beach. At the age of 12, shortly before the end of the war in 1975, the family were evacuated to the US and settled in Sacramento, California, where, with the help of sponsors, they began a new life. Ngoc describes herself as a very shy and reserved child, but that did not hinder her development. She found her own way to the University of Berkeley, where she earned a BA, followed by a Masters of Landscape Design at Columbia University. After spending some time traveling to Japan and Europe, Ngoc made her way to New York with a view to working in painting restoration. But after a chance encounter while working on a feature film, she discovered her true passion was to be a photographer. So she learned black and white photography and developing. Ngoc's images have been published in the world of Interiors, T Magazine, Vogue, Architectural Digest, Cabana, and House and Garden UK. She is also the author of 5 books, Bringing Nature Home, Floral Arrangements Inspired by Nature, In Bloom, Creating and Living with Flowers, and Eden Revisited, a garden in northern Morocco, as well as The House of a Lifetime and New York Green. She's currently working on a new book entitled Roses in the Garden, inspired by her father's death. She has, she says, always been independent and self-contained, paving her own way as a refugee and reimagining her life as a reflection through the beauty of the images she creates. Ngoc and her husband, the photographer Julian Was, live in New York. They have a daughter, Lily, who works in public health and is also a poet. Ngoc, welcome to the podcast. Thank you so much for joining me this week.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Well, I thought your story was very interesting. Although we met very briefly, I did look into your story, and you've since enlightened me on some of the things that you've been doing. You've been a photographer now for how many years?
Oh, gosh, I would say around 30 years or more.
And was it always photography for you then? Not did you do anything else in the art world, or did you discover a camera and that was it?
No, not at all. I discovered it rather late in life. I studied economics at UC Berkeley, and I thought I was going to work in like development economies. And I spent one semester, I mean, not one semester, one summer as an intern in Washington, D.C., and realized that that is not really the world that I want to be in. So after I graduated, I lived in Japan. I came back and I started working for a company in San Francisco called Esprit, and it's a clothing company. And I did that for a while, and then I went to Europe. I knew that I didn't want to do that forever, so I went to Europe and got really interested in painting restoration. And I did a class in painting restoration in Italy and really, really loved it. And a friend of mine said, well, you can study that at NYU in New York City. And so I couldn't afford to stay in Italy and study it there. So I thought, I'll come back to the States and do that. And then I went to NYU to apply to the program at the New York University Institute of Fine Arts. And they said, well, you need 2 years of chemistry before you can apply. And I go, oh, wow. And by then I had started working in New York and started doing other things. And one thing led to another. I ended up working on a feature film. And on the film, we looked at a lot of photography books, and I really fell in love with photography then. And mostly black and white photography, because we were shooting the film in black and white. And so the still photographer on the film taught me how to print. And I started from there.
So you did learn the old-fashioned way then of printing black and white, and the intoxication, if you will, that mesmerizing smell of the fixer in the dark room, and it becomes an addiction in itself, doesn't it?
Well, it's that magical thing that happens when you put the paper into the developer and the image comes through, and yes, I had an apartment in Soho that had a bathtub in the kitchen because there was no separate bathroom. And there was a lid that goes over the bathtub, and that was my kitchen counter. And that's where I set up my dark room.
So you learnt to do it all properly then from the start in the pre-digital age.
Oh, yes. That was way before digital came into existence. So yes, I did.
Do you still use that? No? Do you still use black and white and develop yourself?
No, I don't actually. Funny enough, because I really fell in love with photography. I mean, I discovered photography through black and white photography, but I never thought I could do it very well. And it wasn't until I learned how to do color photography that I felt like I could take it somewhere, because I think I was always interested in paintings, and I was always very attuned to colors. And so when I discovered color photography, I think that's when I decided that I could be a photographer.
So what was the turning point when you realized that commercially you could be a photographer, not just for fun and because you enjoyed developing and so on?
Yeah, so I was printing. By then I had outgrown my bathroom dark room. So I was printing at a place. Back in the day, there were these places where you could rent a dark room by the hour. And so I went to this one place where lots of people went to. So I met a few photographers, and someone asked me to print his work because he was a still life photographer, and he was very busy, and his name was Carlton Davis. He was starting to get a lot of work, so he didn't have time to make his own prints. So he asked me if I could be his printer. And that's how I started making my living from photography, not taking pictures directly, but by printing. And that was the first step. And then eventually a friend of mine asked me to shoot something it was a big job. And my boyfriend at the time was a photography assistant. So he had a lot more experience than I did. So I asked him if he could come along and do it with me. And we discovered that we worked really well together. So we spent a number of years working together. And then we got married, and then we had a daughter. And then I decided that, well, someone had to stay home with her because we traveled a lot in our work, and we couldn't just both leave at the same time. So we took turns. So we then developed separate careers. I started shooting on my own then, and then just started developing my own interest in photography.
So what were you photographing very early on then? What were the subjects that were appealing to you, both from black and white and then when you got into color?
Well, when I first started photographing, just like anyone else, you just photograph whatever was around you. So, and also being in New York City, there's so many photogenic opportunities just walking down the street every day. So that's what I did. But it's just like a process of elimination. I'm very reserved, I would say very shy. So I couldn't really do street photography. I couldn't like put a camera in front of someone's face on the street, although many times I wanted to. So I started, photographing more landscapes and still life, things that I could do on my own in a studio setting. And then I started getting a lot of work shooting for magazines, and it was just whatever they sent you out to do. But it was a really good experience because you just learn to do everything.
I want to go back to your painting. You have a love of painting. First of all, do you still paint? Do you have time to?
Well, I love paintings, but I didn't say that I am a good painter. I love looking at paintings, and I would like to be a better painter. I don't have time to do that. I've taken classes here and there whenever I could, but I would like to devote more time to learning how to draw and paint, just for my own pleasure, really, because it really makes you look at things. I mean, photography is also all about looking, but there's an aspect of photography that is sort of it's faster and it's more instantaneous, whereas painting is more contemplative, which I really like.
Well, I want to go back to your early influences because you were born in Vietnam in April 1963, an interesting time, and I'm sure a very, very different culture you grew up in. What were your earliest memories? No.
Well, I had a really wonderful childhood. I think I had almost like an enchanted childhood because I come from a very large family and I'm the sixth of 8 children. So I had lots of older siblings and it's a very lively family. So there are always things going on. There are always lots of activities. And I'm much more of an observer, and I've always been a very quiet child. So I loved being in this environment where, there are things going on, and Vietnam, for me, my childhood was beautiful. We lived in I was born in Nha Trang, which is by the sea. So we spent a lot of time at the beach. It's a small town, so it was a very, I guess my parents really sheltered us. And I think that they gave us really, for me, a really, really magical childhood. So I think when I first came to the States, people would say, "Oh, you lived through the war." And I said, "Yes, but I had a really beautiful childhood." And I did. It was a very loving environment. There were always people around. My parents, my father comes from a very large family, and we are a large family. So there were always relatives, extended family. So yeah, it was a very loving and beautiful environment.
Lovely to hear, because as you said, you grew up through the war, and your father, Cha Minh Ngo, he was actually a former colonel in the South Vietnam Army. I'm curious then as to how that impacted you as a family, Ngoc.
So as a family, we grew up with him being in the army, so it was the only thing that we knew. And we had pretty much normal lives like everyone else. We went to school most of the time, and we had our summer holidays. But there were certain times where, if my father had some intelligence that things were insecure, he would send us off to a friend's house to spend the night. So we would be out of harm's way or something like that. And a lot of times we lived within my father's base. So we were surrounded by the military, but it was just what we knew. We didn't know anything else. And again, we just felt very protected.
So if you were close to the base then, did that mean that your father didn't have to travel so much? He didn't have to go away and leave the family during the war?
He did actually. He would often have to go on missions, far away. And he had a very interesting life, because when he was young, when he was still in school in 1945, I believe, it's when he was 18. It's when the Japanese invaded, and he was at school then, and the school dismissed all the students, and they had to all leave, and his family had to evacuate from where they were living, and he joined the Viet Minh, who were the nationalists fighting against the French. So he spent a number of years in his early youth fighting the French. And then when this country split in two, his younger brother ended up in the north. And so they were on opposite sides of the war. So my father lived through so many different experiences and a lot of losses in his life. He lost his youngest brother, who was very sadly killed in a bomb that was meant for my father. So yeah, there were a lot of losses, like deep losses in his life, but he always made the greatest efforts to protect us from all of that.
Are your parents still living, Ngoc?
My mother is. She is 92 or 91 this year, and she's very, very well. My father, unfortunately, passed away in 2008.
And your mother was a nurse's aide. So did she have a role during the war?
No, my mother in Vietnam was basically taking care of the family. My mother also had an amazing story. She is the most remarkable woman that I know. She was an orphan when she met my father, and she married him very young and had 8 children. In fact, she had 9 children, but lost her first son, her oldest son. And so she raised us while my father was in the army. And then when we came to the States, we all had to work, all my older siblings and my parents. And so she found herself, when she was in her 40s, when she came here, she didn't know English. She learned the language. And she eventually became a nurse's aide and worked until she retired. And had, and in her retirement, had all of these colleagues who she worked with gather around her, and families of children of women that she had helped at the clinic. Their children, their grown-up children, still keep in touch with her. So yeah, she's really remarkable.
What year did the family move to the US, Ngoc?
In 1975, at the end of the war.
Right at the end of the war, yes. How did that decision come about? With such a large family, it was a big decision.
Oh, there was no question in my parents' mind that we would stay back in Vietnam, because with my father's position, it would have been a lot of hardship for us. I mean, he would have been put in a re-education camp. We would have lost everything anyway. Our family wouldn't have, we would probably be sent to the countryside to work in the farms and things. So, I mean, it was just unthinkable for my parents for us to stay, because that wasn't the future that they wanted for us.
But with your father being in the military, was it difficult to arrange for the whole family to leave the country? Was he being watched?
It was, because of the number of people that we have in our family.
Yeah.
We actually were part of the evacuation that the U.S. did for military personnel and other people, families of military personnel. So we left like about a week before the end, but my father had to stay until the very last day. And luckily he was able to find his way out.
And what about grandparents? No, because often we relate to some of our grandparents. We have favorite grandparents, right? You know, we have relationship with grandparents. What happened to that relationship you had with yours? Did you have a favorite on one side or the other?
Well, I only have grandparents on my father's side because my mother was an orphan. So my favorite grandparent is my grandmother. And unfortunately, she died when I was quite young. But I spent some time living with her on my own. And she was a very gentle woman who was a Buddhist, and she taught me so much. I was very, very young, but I think I inherited some of her sort of quietness. That kind of, I don't know how to describe it, but I felt like she was very very self-contained person. And I think I learned to be like that with her in the short time that I lived with her.
What does that self-contained look like now, though, as an adult?
Well, I have always been quite independent, quite self-contained, I guess. Because, when we came to the States, I was 12. My parents had to work like crazy. And so we were pretty much left to our own devices. And I basically navigated the world on my own. Of course, my parents were there and they provided a roof over our head, but they were working all the time. They had lost everything. They had to rebuild their whole fortune, and they were in a foreign country and all of that. But anyway, so yeah, from the age of 12 onward, I was very much my own person. And I went to college at 17. I did everything myself. My parents knew nothing about it. I filled out all the applications. I went to Berkeley by myself to find housing. We lived in Sacramento, so I took the bus there and, found my way around and supported myself through college. My parents didn't have to do anything. So yeah, I guess, and I've always been like that since.
So when you moved to the States, did you move directly to California, Sacramento?
Yeah.
Okay. So you all were there and you were all educated there?
Yes.
Mm-hmm. What did your dad do when he moved here?
Any number of things. His very, very first job, because we arrived it's in May, by the time we arrived in Sacramento. That was sort of the end of the month, around May, June. And so the first job that he got was in a cannery, a peach cannery at the time. They were still canning peaches in Sacramento. There was a lot of agriculture there still. And then he worked in a restaurant, in a country club. And then my parents, both of them, we had these incredible sponsors to help us, acclimatize ourselves and to get us started and to help us and get settled in Sacramento. So they helped my parents to get a grocery store. So they ran a grocery store for a while until that just became very unprofitable and they had to get out. And then he started working at the sheriff's office because he was a commander of logistics. So he was a very organized person. So he worked at the sheriff's office organizing all their files back in the days when they still have manila folders. And so he did such a great job there. They wanted him to stay, but then he got a job somewhere else. So for a while, he worked 2 jobs because he didn't want to lose the opportunity. He wasn't sure if the other job was secure. So anyway, so yeah, eventually he ended up working at the welfare department, being a caseworker.
And which high school did you go to then? Because you jumped ahead to Berkeley, you got yourself there, which was commendable. But where did you go to school? At the age of 12, you must have gone to middle school, high school.
Yes, I went to what the time we called junior high, from 8th to, I guess, 8th and 9th grade. And then I went to high school in Sacramento at a school called Rio Americano.
And how was that for you? Not because you were obviously still learning English, someone coming from the kind of background you did into a new country and a new culture and socially as a shy child. Well, that must have been challenging, I would have thought.
Oh, it was. It was in many ways, but I don't think I found it challenging as such. I never thought of it that way. It was just, basically navigating my way through it. And again, just more being almost more like being outside of myself, almost, being an observer more than anything. Yes, it was difficult, but in a way, it didn't feel difficult because I never had time to think of it as being difficult. You know what I mean? So language wise, I spoke French when I came, so it was easy for me to learn as another language. I think having learned, a second language already, English, I had the summer. And at 12, you pick things up very quickly. Mm-hmm. So I had a summer to learn English. And by the time I started school, I had enough, to get by in school. And I had the one teacher in English who taught me everything that I know in English. And I still remember him very vividly. It was Mr. Gonzalez in 8th grade. Yes, he taught me all the grammar that I know to this day. And in terms of being in school in general, socially, yes, it was a completely different culture. I didn't have any friends. I did have my brother, although by then we were going through puberty. So him being a boy and I'm being a girl, we were basically in different worlds. We were inhabiting different universes. So, and I felt a lot younger than many of my peers in terms of, I think I just had a more innocent childhood. I wasn't, so I felt like some of the other students were way older than I am, even though they're maybe just a year older. And I was a grade ahead because my brother and I started school at the same time and he was a year younger. So I was always young. I was always the youngest in the class, but I felt even younger than everyone else.
Which brother was that? No.
Dennis.
Okay. What about your sisters, though? Were they at a different age? They didn't go to school with you at the same time?
No. So for some particular reason, my sponsor decided that I and my brother, because we were in the same grade, should go to a better school than the one that was in our school district. So they made it possible for us to go to a school outside of our school district. So all of my younger sisters and my other sister who was in high school went to a different school district. Very complicated.
Yes, well, that's a large family to find schools for.
Yeah.
What subjects were you enjoying in school?
What subject did I enjoy? I always enjoyed reading. I was good at almost everything. So school was very easy for me. And I always liked art, but I was not very good at it. So yeah, I didn't really have a particular subject that I really, caught on to, but I did enjoy reading.
Well, now obviously you enjoy writing because you write books.
Yes.
Where was the catalyst for that?
Well, I like I said, I've always liked writing, so I like words, and I like, yes, I appreciate writing. I never thought I was very good at it, but I guess it takes practice. So I've been doing it for a while, so I'm getting better, I hope, at it. But I guess as a means of expression, I've always kept like a journal on and off. I mean, I don't do it very diligently as I should, but yeah, I because I enjoy reading so much, I think I find it enviable to be able to express yourself in words.
So obviously English is your daily language, but did you keep up any French?
Yes, I did. I lived in France for a little while as well. And yes, I did keep up my French, and I read in French.
I want to go back to Europe with you, Ngoc, because you skipped over that. You told us about going to Japan and then Europe and your time doing painting restoration in Italy. So how did those European adventures come about? What was the process that they came about, and at what age were you?
So I first went to Europe when I was 22. My boyfriend from college was doing a year in France. And so when I left Japan, I made my way to France, and I joined him there. And his father was an amazing man. He was from Chile. We had sort of a similar background. His father had been not a refugee like we were, but they were displaced because of the political situation in Chile. And so I think he was quite fond of me. So he took us on a trip, a road trip, and we drove from Lyon in France through the French Riviera and the Italian Riviera and across the north of Italy to Venice. And then on the way back, we went through Switzerland back to France. So it was an incredible trip. I learned so much about the art and the culture and the food. And I remember in Italy, people, especially in these small towns in northern Italy at the time, this was in 1985. And I don't think many people had seen Asians in these towns. So I was always a point of curiosity for people. Little children would come up to me and sort of touch me, just like to feel like I was real or something. It kind of, made me laugh most of the time, but it was strange. It was strange to feel so foreign, to feel so, to be almost like an object of curiosity, which I was. And people would say things to me in Italian, and I said, it would just blow their mind if I could just speak Italian back to them. I went back to the States. I learned Italian.
Bravissima.
Thank you.
So these are very big cultural shifts for you. But you mentioned Japan also. That was was it the first country you visited after you graduated from the US, from Berkeley? Yeah. And what was the reason for going there?
Oh, I had studied Japanese at Berkeley, and I was sort of interested in the culture. First, because it's an Asian culture, and second, it's a fascinating culture. So different from anything I knew. So yeah, I just wanted to spend some time there.
There wasn't any wartime legacy then that impacted you, growing up from that invasion.
Right. No. It wasn't a history that I lived personally, so no.
So after coming back from Europe then and your travels, when you got back to the US, what were you doing at that point?
So after that first trip, I came home very broke and I had to get a job. And so it was like any job will do. And so I went to see the human resources department at Esprit, which at the time was probably the most interesting company to work for in San Francisco. This was a company that was owned by a man named Doug Tompkins and his wife at the time, Susie Tompkins. They had started this clothing company, and they were not at all part of the fashion world. They started by selling clothes out of the back of their car, and it became very successful. And suddenly they've got this big business, and so they hired all their friends who were sort of not quite hippie type, but San Francisco at the time. And so it was a very progressive company. We had open plan offices. We had direct access to the bosses. There's the hierarchy is not so corporate. It was the most uncorporate company you could think of. They provided a lot of amenities for the workers. We had subsidized food prepared by great chefs. And at the time, California was discovering all this fresh food. It was before anyone had heard of mesclun salads. We had it. And so it was just a very, very progressive kind of company. And for example, a bunch of us wanted to learn Italian, myself included. So we went to the owner of the company and said, that we really want to learn Italian. So, okay, will you find a teacher and she can come here before work hours and you can have your lessons and I will pay for it. And we did. So things like that. We had beautiful facilities. We had a nice park. We had just the working environment was really, really nice. We had a whole team of carpenters that built our desks for us. And it was very nurturing also, because I started there as an adjuster. I don't know if you even know what that means, which is basically in the accounting department. It was the most boring job ever. And when I interviewed for it, the women, there were two women who were the head of, who were both in charge of the human resources, said, well, you're going to be bored with this job in 2 months. I said, I need the job, so please just give it to me. And they did. And they were right. I was bored after 2 months. But when I was having lunch one day by myself, the head of another department came by and said, oh, who are you? What's your name? What do you do? Come and visit me in my department, and I did. And said, well, would you like to work in this department? And I said, oh, sure, And so I ended up eventually in a position that was created for me by my boss, who was this lovely woman. And she had too much work on her hands, so she created this little position for me. And I ended up working on fabrics and traveling to Asia like several times a year. And I enjoyed that. I enjoyed the experience. I learned a lot, but I knew that wasn't something I wanted to do my whole life. And so I left eventually.
What was her name? We should give her a shout out, Ngoc.
Darlene Brightwell. She was really a great boss, a really nice mentor. She was the most encouraging boss, very hands off, but she just, I mean, she's the kind of boss that you want. She knows, she expects a lot out of you. She doesn't expect you to be a slacker, but she is very hands off. She trusts you to handle things, and she would always encourage me to take time off while I'm in Hong Kong or in Taiwan. It's like, just go to Singapore and take a day or two at the hotel. It's really nice.
Well, that was wonderful to add to your international experience. And then eventually, though, you made your way back to New York.
Yes.
How did that come about?
It was for to study painting restoration. That was the goal. That was the goal in coming to New York. And, I think looking back, all of this travel, it's about trying to find my place because, I had this incredible childhood where I felt very secure and in my place. And that was my place in the world. And that was upended. And I was a refugee. I was in this strange place where I didn't necessarily belong. So I think my sort of trajectory through all those years was to just say, I don't know where I belong, and so I belong everywhere. So it was just, it also the desire to see other places and everything, but also a part of it is just to trying to find my little corner.
But now you feel that New York City is your home. You most belong there, and obviously your husband
Yes.
and daughter there. What about the rest of your family? Are they scattered around the US? Tell us where they are now.
Yes. So actually, my daughter is living in Hong Kong.
Okay.
She graduated from college last year, and she got a job in Hong Kong.
Right.
So she's far away. And my husband is from England, so he's also from a different place. And then the rest of my family are in California, and my oldest sister is in Texas.
And where's your mother?
My mother is in California.
Do you get to see them much?
I try to go as often as I can. Yes. Yeah. Not as much as I would like to, but I do try to several times a year.
Because I know you're very busy with your photography and your books now. So bring us up to the present day, what you're working on at the moment, Ngoc.
So I am finishing up a book. It's about roses, and it's a book that was probably inspired by my father's death. When he passed away, I thought a lot about his last days and his life and the little garden that he made for himself in the last few decades of his life. And it had roses in it. And when he was ill in his final weeks, I was so hoping that the roses would bloom, but they didn't bloom in time. So that sort of preoccupied me for a while, and I started photographing roses, and it allowed me to keep thinking about him, and also to sort of communicate with him in some other ways. Because roses have so many stories to them, and they are a flower that is beloved everywhere in the world. And so all of that sort of is this rich mine that I could delve into. It's almost inexhaustible, and relate it back to my father. So that was a long time ago. And since he passed away in 2008. And so at some point I thought, oh, well, I would like to do a book on this. And I was about to start it in 2020, but then the pandemic happened. So it got delayed another couple of years. So now it's going to come out in 2025.
And what's it going to be called?
It's called Roses in the Garden, Stories of Treasured Collections. So I go to 11 different gardens in Japan, the UK, France, Morocco, and the US. And they're just different gardens where people have had this love for the rose and have created gardens that incorporate a lot. They're not rose gardens as such, the old-fashioned rose gardens where all you see is roses, but there are gardens in which roses play a big part symbolically or culturally or horticulturally. There's a garden in Spain, in Mallorca, that is basically a memorial garden that this woman had made for her daughter who died tragically at 19. So, roses are so powerful as symbols like that. So there are all these stories connected with these gardens.
So what's the next project then for you?
So I'm working on several things. Some are just collaborations and not really my own project. And one of which I'm really enjoying is photographing Jamaica Kincaid's garden for her book that she's writing. So she's writing the book and I'm photographing it. And so I get to talk to her a lot, and she's amazing. And I am about to embark on a big writing project. And it's basically a memoir about my work and my life and how it all happens.
Well, I was going to ask you if there was a memoir, an autobiography coming, because clearly you have a wonderful story to tell, and to have a book which you can really take your time to unpack this story, Ngoc.
Yes, it is my story, but also it's more about how it relates to my work. But all these questions that that I think about, like where I belong, or what is a garden, and what is your place? I think, like some people identify very strongly with a place where you feel that you belong to it and it belongs to you. Those questions are things that I would like to explore.
I'm also curious as to what you feel you learned or you were impacted by most strongly by your parents, particularly your father, because you obviously had a good relationship with them, well, both of them, but they both played their own role in your life. What were your biggest takeaways now as an adult and how they informed you?
I think first and foremost, and I think this is from both of them, is, and my mom still tells me all the time, kindness is to be generous with people and be kind. Always, I think my parents have enormous empathy And they've really passed that on to us, not just me, but all of us. And even to my daughter, I think, because my mother, talks to all her grandchildren the same as she did to us, her children. And so my daughter is a very compassionate young woman, and she actually is in public health. She's a very artistic person. She writes incredibly well. She's a poet, and she's also visually a visual artist as well. But she chose to study public health, and she's also really good at science. So, and she is really the most compassionate person that I know personally. So I think that comes from both of my parents. And resilience, and the fact that, they lost everything at one point in their life. But that almost didn't matter. And that, I think, is a huge lesson for me, that you don't have to be attached to things. There are other matters that are more important than things, material things. They can always be replaced. My parents they had several houses in Vietnam. They lost them all. They lost everything that they owned, but they made another home for themselves. So it's people, is how you feel, how you think that matter than what you own. So yeah, those that I think are the essential things that they've passed on to me.
What would you say your scars in life would be, if you have any?
Scars? I've never thought of things as scars. I mean, the biggest loss for me, and it is something to do with the fact that I'm a photographer, is that my father was an amateur photographer. He loved photography. He took lots and lots of pictures of us. He took photographs and Super 8 films of us constantly whenever he had, in his spare time. So whenever he was at home. And so we had a huge collection of photographs, family photographs and films. And when we left, they had been boxed up very carefully. And it was their intention, my parents' intention, to send them off, to have them sent off wherever we settled, which of course did not happen. But more than that, when the communists came, our housekeeper decided that it was best to erase all traces of us. So in these boxes were also our personal documents, letters, and photographs. So they were burned, all of them. And so it is this complete erasure of our existence, if you will. And that for me is, I mean, I don't think of it as a scar, but it's sort of a defining thing for me.
Yes. Absolutely. Erasing one's past, one's history, family, everything.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And now in some way you're photographing your world, your vision, your perspective of the world. And you do it mostly through landscapes, gardens, and the visual world. What else would you like to photo? What else is on your bucket list?
Well, I photograph a lot of plants. And recently I've started to photograph a lot of plants in the wild, in their native habitats. And that's something that interests me a great deal for a number of reasons, for ecological reasons. And also, again, it goes back to the idea of the garden, right? What makes the garden, why we garden, why we always have, well, humans have gardened. And to see these landscapes in the wild, they are the most beautiful gardens that you can imagine. And that makes you question the role of humans, in we've always sort of pride ourselves as the creative animals or the creative species, but to see these landscapes in the wild, it makes you question all of that. It makes you humble. Like to what extent we can claim, all these powers that we have.
Do you have a garden at home?
I have a very small plot that is in front of my building that I take care of. It is very, very small, and it's on the corner. So it's a blessing and a curse, because it's wonderful to have the garden be enjoyed by the whole neighborhood. And people really do enjoy my garden. They come and tell me when I'm working in the garden, they come and say, "Oh, thank you so much for making this garden so beautiful." And that really, it brings me so much joy when people say that to me, or they ask me what this flower is. They want to learn about something, a plant, all of that. It gives me immense joy. The flip side of that is sometimes people steal my flowers. The other day, I just went out and just realized somebody had cut 4 of my peonies. I mean, literally with scissors. Usually someone, I can see someone had tried to tear off a flower. So I feel like that's sort of some impulsive thing. They see a flower, and they somehow are overwhelmed by its beauty, and they just want to take it with them, and they tear it off. But this is like a premeditated act. Someone came with scissors and cut 4 peonies. So then last night, my husband saw someone trying to tear a flower off a rose. I have this rose on the fence. And he said, "Oh, please don't do that." My wife gets very upset. And she said, "Well, can I just take one?"
But you have a lot of satisfaction from nurturing it.
Yes, I do. Yeah. And, it evolves, it changes as I learn more about ecology and about, in the beginning it was more about design, but now I'm more interested in ecology. So it's always evolving.
Well, I hope we see you again in Virginia. But for now, I know how busy you are, and I want to thank you so much for taking the time to do this podcast with me. I feel that we could talk about a lot more, a lot of different subjects. But for now, I want to thank you again. It really has been a pleasure, Ngoc. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. It's a pleasure to talk to you too.
And while you're on your podcast app, if you scroll down to the show notes below this episode, you'll find links to Ngoc's website and to her social media. You'll also find a link to our Instagram, where you can follow and comment there about the show, leave any suggestions for guests, of course. And you can also reach us via email. That's hollowellstudios@gmail.com. We always love to hear from you. My thanks again to my guest this week, Ngoc Minh Ngo, and to you for listening. I'll be back next week when my guest will be the Belarusian soft pastel artist Tanya Avchinikova, so I do hope you'll join me then.